We got off to a great start yesterday with around 200 people joining a fantastic panel of farmers to discuss species-rich grasslands, and that recording will also be made available shortly. As this is a webinar, the video and audio have been disabled. However, you will be still having the use of the Q&A box to put any of your questions in, and we'd encourage you to do this throughout the session instead of waiting until the Q&A session at the end. The chat function is also available, so please use them to introduce yourselves if you'd like, but please use the Q&A function to submit any questions. If you do submit them in the chat box, then they might not get asked. And we will be answering questions after the presentations in the Q&A session at the end. So depending on the time, we may not be able to get through all the questions, in which case we'll try our best to get back to you after the event. So welcome everyone, croeso pawb. This is day 3 of Nature Friendly Farming Week, which is all about soils. Welcome to the second webinar of the week, which will be focusing on soil health and closing the nutrient gap. My name is Rhys Evans, so I'm the Sustainable Farming Lead for Nature Friendly Farming Network Cymru. Also farm myself, farm beef and sheep with the family in a very small village called Rhydymain in a very small town called Dolgellau in North Wales. Now I'll begin this webinar by providing a bit of context as to why we're focusing on soils. Why soils? Why dedicate an entire day looking at soils? Well, if you ask 100 farmers what the most important asset they have on their farms, I would imagine that 99% would give the same one-word answer: soil. Soil is the most fundamental resource to a farmer. It's a complex, diverse ecosystem that is critical for all life. It underpins crop and livestock production, acts as a water filter, a nutrient giver, it sequesters carbon and provides a habitat for billions of different organisms. However, over the recent decades, our soils have been degraded, mainly through erosion, compaction and pollution. And unfortunately, we do have to acknowledge that unsustainable agriculture, particularly the excessive use of synthetic fertilizers and chemicals, overgrazing and monocropping, have contributed towards this deterioration. It's never nice to admit that as a farmer, but we can't put our heads in the sand. But this isn't a negative webinar, it's a positive one, and I'm delighted to be joined today by 3 farmers from across the UK who are using regenerative and nature-friendly farming practices to improve soil health, to sequester carbon, store water, build healthier and more resilient farm ecosystems. So with that, let's meet our 3 panelists. Joining me this evening, Denise Walton, Hywel Morgan and Charlie Cole. So starting with Denise, can you please introduce yourself to the virtual audience?
Thanks very much, Rhys. Good evening, everybody. My name is Denise Walton. I farm with my family, my husband and my son in partnership here in Southeast Scotland in Berwickshire. We're organic and pasture for life. We farm mostly beef and we have an on-farm butchery, so we can see the results in the carcasses of what we farm.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Hywel Morgan. I farm at Esgallaethdy Myddfai in the western edge of the Banner Brycheiniog, upland hill farm, 400 sheep, 40-odd sucklers, a mix of Hereford and Highlands. I farm in partnership with my parents, which are pretty much semi-retired, so most of the tasks come down to me. I'm the NFFN Cymru chair. I also work a couple of days a week for Plant Life as the Agri Advisor in Cymru. And I've just gone organic this year. I've been pretty much regenerative for about 4 years, and just working with the natural resources we have on a farm, a soil, of course, and the harness the power of the sun and the rain. Thanks.
Evening, everyone. My name is Charlie Cole. I'm on the NI steering group. I farm 50 acres on the north coast of Northern Ireland. It's a small farm that's bought by my parents, and we're very lucky to farm it. We initially specialised in kid goat and free range raised veal, and we built up a farm to fork sort of model with an on-site butchery, farm shop and cafe. And as we progress, we're becoming increasingly mixed and looking at more regenerative farming practices wherever we can as well. So.
Well, thank you guys. It's great to have you here tonight, and thank you for joining us to share your knowledge and experience. In terms of tonight's format, Denise will kick things off by providing more information on why soils are so important, explain a bit about the science of what's going on underneath our feet, and touch on some of the regenerative farming principles that are centered on improving soil health. And barring any technical mishaps, we'll then show 2 short videos, around 6 minutes each, from Howell and Charlie's farms that showcase what they're doing on their own farms to improve soil health and to close the nutrient gap. And really to try and reduce that reliance on bought-in farm inputs. So that will bring all this to life, if you like, and see what it looks like on a working farm. And then we'll move on to the Q&A session. So please submit your questions at any time during the webinar using the Q&A function. So without further ado, I'll hand things over to you, Denise.
Thanks very much, Rhys. Actually, I also should have mentioned that I'm Scottish chair of the NFFN up here in Scotland. So if we go to the first slide, please, Phil. This is a very dramatic slide, and it demonstrates in relation to the area of the British Isles, the actual global area or equivalent of topsoil. So it's been calculated that topsoil, the total global cubic kilometerage, if you like, of topsoil is 8,400 kilometer cubed, which fits into approximately the size of London. That is our topsoil limit globally. And as farmers, we all know how important topsoil is. We also know that there is a very extensive degradation of topsoil. In the UK, we've got 40% and growing degradation of soils in the UK. So what I'm going to present this evening is that acknowledging the importance of this resource and a little bit on the science. Next slide, please. So this is another finite resource, and I thought I'd include this as well, because soil and water are intimately bound up. We need water filtrating through soils to grow our plants. Soil function needs water, and water aquatic systems need nutrients from soil. So again, this demonstrates, in terms of global scale, the very small amount of fresh water. So the large sphere is the total amount of water on the planet. And there's the tiny sphere to the right of the large sphere is the total amount of fresh water. So what you can't see is in fact, it's indistinguishable, is a total amount of sphere, which is total amount of fresh water that we can access in lakes and rivers. So these are 2 finite resources on which we are entirely dependent. And the health of one depends on the health of the other, and both together we depend on for our existence. Next slide, please, Phil. So this is just an illustration of the approach to a whole systems approach. So we need to think of things in a whole systems way. New science is demonstrating the integration and the interconnectedness between plants, soils, nutrition, health, environmental health. But I'd say with confidence that it all begins with soils. So we need a whole systems approach to managing soils. Next slide, please. So it's actually not above the soil that matters as much. So everything above the soil we need for plants, we need for livestock cropping, we need for fiber, for accessing sunlight. So, but actually that's not as much as what is below the soil. Next slide, please. So it's what's below the soil really matters. And soil is absolutely nothing without soil roots. So soil root biomass is effectively the soil biomass. So our whole approach as farmers is actually the important thing is to focus on the root health in the soil for our plants, which then obviously affect the nutritional health of the plants that we eat and our livestock eat. So root biomass is critically important because it's this root soil interface that absorbs water, absorbs nutrients, and also communicates with mycorrhiza and bacteria. It's a whole new microbiome world that new science is opening up to us, both as farmers, land managers, and nutritionists. Traditionally, in soil science, we used to look at the balance between chemical structure of soils, biological structure of soils, and the physical structure of soils. And actually what we're saying as agroecological farmers is, number one, we've got to look at the biology. We've got to see what the living soil system is doing, how healthy it is, how it's functioning, how it's drawing up water. So obviously the chemical and the physical aspects are important, but we've really got to focus on a whole systems basis to the biological function of our soils. Next slide, please. So why do roots matter? So what I've done is, we'll focus on nitrogen as an example, but effectively what roots are doing is they're capitalizing on the sugars that are captured via sunlight and via photosynthesis. And it's the sugars through the root system that actually capitalize on the minerals in the soils. So the yield, above ground yield, is important, but it's not as important as the below ground yield. So everything we do has to focus on root health. So the roots below ground, obviously they store carbon, they stabilize soils, carbon sequesters for a much longer time in the roots, and they really are the substrate for productivity. So if we look at nitrogen, so applying nitrogen as an artificial fertilizer, or as literally as an ionic chemical, we know improves above ground yield. But also we know that there is a trade-off between the above ground yields and below ground root mass. So the trade-off is between root for shoot, and with the application of agrochemical nitrogen, we know from science that soil organic matter diminishes, it decreases. And we're learning different ways of improving soil organic matter and nitrogen. So here's a good example. There's something like 74,000 tons of atmospheric nitrogen above every hectare. And all of this is accessible for plant growth through the diversity of plant and nitrogen fixing soil microbes. Now here we've got soil diversity, microbial diversity coming into its own. So working with diversity, as agroecological farmers working with biodiversity to access and convert nitrogen to ammonia through rhizobia in legumes. So they have the capacity to fix nitrogen from gaseous nitrogen in soil particles and transforming it to ammonia. So actually, in current figures, you can have farm savings on fertilizers of something of 850 to 890 pounds a tonne. So in relation to soil biodiversity and profitability, you've got an immediate profit margin improvement by improving your soil root health and your soil nitrogen fixing capacity. Next slide, please. So we've got a number of soil health principles to improve soil health, but what we're arguing as agroecological farmers is that it must focus on soil root health to stimulate what's called maximum root exudation. So when plants photosynthesize, they create sugars which are exuded, but not as simple sugars, through the root system into the soil. And that is extremely important for accessing minerals to bring back up to the plant and also improving soil aggregate structure. So we know from new science that the soil exudates, the root exudates, and the soil microbiome actually message each other. So the root exudates can actually switch on and off nutrients for different stages of plant growth. The root exudates are essential for soil productivity, and soil root health is essential for really maximum exudation of soil roots. And the way to really improve root health in terms of cropping is maintain plant cover crops to maintain your root biomass, always keep live roots in your soils, and maximizing above ground biodiversity to stimulate root growth. And this maintaining of continual live plant root presence, minimizing soil disturbance, and also livestock integration. Obviously, in arable systems, we grow crops which are annuals, not perennials. So the predominance of annual cropping in arable systems actually reduces soil biomass and soil root exudation. We really need to look at integrating perennial plant systems, i.e. grazing livestock, with arables so that we can increase the long-term buildup of soil root biomass. Cover cropping is important, not leaving soils bare. So cover cropping increases root biomass, but also cover cropping with intercropping. So if we have plant diversity and plant root diversity, which are basically working with different exudates, different minerals, we're actually improving total root biomass. So really what we're working at is a maximum diversity of roots and plants, minimum disturbance, and integrating livestock to make the most hospitable environment for roots and, again, the root exudates. Wish there was another word to describe them, but anyway. Next slide, please. So we know that we've got the main sort of soil health indicators are bulk density, i.e. You get higher bulk density with very compacted soils and low bulk density with soils which are aerated. Soil aggregate stability, so when you pick up a handful of soil, there's good crumb structure. And then water holding capacity. So you'll know if you pour a glass of water over sand, the water runs straight through it because there's no water holding capacity. Whereas if you pour a glass of water into a well aggregated soil profile, it actually holds the water. So root biomass affects every single one of those soil health indicators. in terms of aeration, water management, and also reducing soil bulk density. Now, the important thing in terms of a root biomass, it's actually, the important thing root biomass is what they call the necromass. This is the bulk of dead microbiome matter and the microbiomes which are working with the roots which hold the soils together. So it's not the roots themselves dying off, it's not above ground plant matter dying off that improves soil organic matter for the long term and for the best health outcome. It's actually the buildup of the dead and decaying microbes, the mycorrhiza, the bacteria, etc. And we know that we need long-term soil conditions of low disturbance, high root exudate to have the greatest amount of necromass. Next slide, please. So what we do here at Pelham, as we're principally beef farmers, we work with our cattle on agroecological grazing systems to work for our soil roots. So what science is also telling us in terms of root biomass is that roots are most active, their exudates are most active, soil biome is most active during the vegetative states of plants. So as soon as plants head into stem and fruiting or grain, actually root mass diminishes. So my earlier comment about annual cropping, basically we have a lot of time in that period of stem and grain. So the root biomass actually diminishes, the root exudates diminish, and the capacity to maintain soils diminishes. So as livestock farmers, we keep long-term grassland rotations and we graze but don't overgraze. And you'll see the image of the cattle on the left-hand side that we've got grass really above the depth of their hoofs, their feet, and that's the ideal. So never overgrazing. If you overgraze, you diminish root biomass. If you let vegetation stem and fruit, you reduce root biomass. So the quickest way actually to improve soil health is grazing and livestock. And if you have an arable system, integrate livestock into your arable system. And on the right-hand side, that's a newly deposited cowpat. It's got early dung beetle activity. The dung beetle activity is extremely important. It indicates the health of dung, the health of our cattle, and also the health of the soil, because those dung beetles are drawing the organic matter from the dung into the soil. And organic matter from dung is easier for microbes to use for their own nutrition. So the agroecological grazing of livestock works for root soils. And if you, as I say, if you have an arable system, look at integrating livestock into your rotation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Denise. I did say that soils were very complex ecosystems, didn't I? And I think that's very much been captured in your presentation. Really interesting, I think, the relationship between the plant and the root and the microbes. And I think we're only just sort of learning about this, really, aren't we? Sort of as farmers, it's not something that we're well versed in, really. And I think that the more we know, I think the more we can harness the power of nature to produce our food more sustainably. I'm really fascinated with what you were saying about how using sort of artificial fertilizer, i.e. getting your nutrients from an external source, it sort of disrupts that symbiotic relationship between the plants and the microbes and that sort of exchange of nutrients that's happening beneath the soils. No, really interesting. I think we'll learn a bit more about that in Hywel's video. So thank you very much for that, Denise. So we'll move on now to West Wales, where we'll be seeing how Hywel on his farm in Esgallaethdy is trying to adopt those principles on his farm, trying to improve soil health and reduce the reliance on inputs. Might be having some technical difficulties with the volume. Phil is working behind the scenes trying to
feed.
That's all right now.
A lot of seeds, spraying off with Roundup. I decided that this is wrong. It's not sustainable for my business, and we made a transition to a low input and a more profitable, sustainable farming system here. Around 5 years ago, I couldn't see the value we're having out of the fertilizer. It was quite high then, even though it's a lot higher now. So we started just using fertilizer on half a field and doing some trials and see if we were having a full benefit and full use of these fertilizer. And I didn't really see any benefit of it, but over a period of 3 years, we are gaining pretty much a bale a year extra, and we're pretty much back to where we are before we cut back on fertilizer. A couple of reasons why I changed to working with nature rather than against it, because I think we need to be most sustainable as farmers, look after the environment, nature, climate, but not waste our hard-earned money on other external companies sort of thing. So try and keep this money on farm, but it's important we work with nature and look after what we have. We'll never beat nature, so let's not kid ourselves and just work with it. So we've cut back on glyphosate and chemical usage. Yeah, so we used to spray off around 10 acres a year and plant Swedes or turnips, and for the winter crop to feed the sheep over winter. So rather than doing that, we'll conserve grass now and just graze sheep on conserve grazing in that key time just prior to lambing. Since we cut back on fertilizer, I've noticed that my soil testing results have improved. And initially I thought, well, what was going on here? But I soon realized that the acid in the fertilizer was draining the pH in my soils. And all of a sudden I've got better pH levels by doing nothing but just by cutbacks. My soil organic matter is rising, soil carbon is rising, and I think it's important that on farms we do improve the soil carbon. The transition itself doesn't happen overnight. It probably takes 3 to 4 years to do it, to get back to where we are now. But in that process, we've plowed and seeded with herbal lays, which is a bit of a game changer. A lot of these herbs are unfermentic, so I've cut back on my animal health bill. Sheep will get wormed once a year. I do fecal egg counting. Cattle get nothing at all, no worming, no porons at all. And yeah, that helps me be more sustainable, more profitable. So the other benefits of herbal lays and a diverse seed mix is, as we've seen this year with quite a dry weather, we've been in a drought. It doesn't look like it today, obviously, but they got more resistance to the dry weather, and with a longer taproot, which they go looking for minerals, looking for water, and they're also, help with water runoff and management over the winter or the wettest parts of the season, which is key going forward. We were up to about 560 sheep. Now we're around 400 sheep. And we've increased the cattle, gone from about 10, 12 sucklers to now we're close to 40 sucklers. And I feel like increasing the cattle has helped here at Esgallaethdy, because I'm creating the muck for the fertilizer. And instead of rather buying fertilizer in a bag, but that cow muck composted down is now my new fertilizer. And by reducing sheep numbers, it's helped with grass growth, especially in springtime when it's quite tighter. Part of the transition was changing the cattle from continental breeds like the Limousin Charolais and the Belgian Blues to a native breed animal. In order to get cattle back on the hills here, we initially tried with just turning them up there, but hefting them was a challenge. So I invested in technology, and now we're using the no fence technology, virtual fencing. It means I can graze them where I want, manage them as and when I need to. Collars are put on the cattle, and it works off a GPS system. I can set up a virtual fence, and they'll get an audible warning when they come close to that virtual fence. And if they get really close to it, they'll get a sharp shock, which is quite friendly, but it does manage to keep them exactly where they want to be. And it allows me, instead of fencing off a big, large chunk of a common, to graze cattle where I want, just by technology. Proper game changer. So from transition into nature-friendly farming methods, we've seen our profit risen here at Safety, and that's various of reasons for that. So by cutting out the inputs for feed, pesticides, or reducing them rather, it makes a difference to the bottom line. My turnover might be less, but my leftover is more, and which is important. And using the natural resources we have on a farm, whether it's just various grass growth, sort of tree canopies, shelter sort of thing, just using what we have here rather than going out to buy something off a shelf. And that is key moving forward and being more sustainable. My name's Howell Morgan.
Great stuff, Howell. Really fascinating journey you've been on, from a self-proclaimed revved up farmer to well, when you shot that video, you were sort of low input, but you're sort of on that journey now to almost a no input farming. I know that there'll be a lot of questions about how you manage that transition later on. So we'll move from West Wales to Northern Ireland and see what Charlie is doing at his farm.
Hi, I'm Charlie Cole, and we're at Brockgammon Farm. We're a small family farm, 50 acres just outside Ballycastle. We're a mixed farm, but we do things a little bit differently here. When we started looking at different farm systems, a closed loop system was something that really kept coming to the forefront. And with the kid goat and the roast veal, that was taking a byproduct from a dairy farm. Something that was, unfortunately being euthanized or exported out of the system, and sort of trying to use that waste stream to create, a value-added product. And as we've concentrated on the rest of the farm business, it's been the same, trying to create closed-loop systems and stopping us having dead ends in the system. And we've incorporated that as we've moved into the field structure. So creating sort of like a lay-based farming system, building fertility naturally, and then harvesting that in our vegetables as well. What you see now is not how the farm looked originally. The man that we bought the farm from had very bad arthritis and wasn't able to get around and check the fields. There was a lot of ragwort, docks, whims growing up in through the fields. And we could see the potential of it. There was a lot of natural capital that we wanted to sort of keep on the farm. But at the same time, it just needed a bit more love and care. Ditches and shucks had fallen in as the cattle had knocked them over. And hedges had been eaten right back. And it just wasn't being managed to the best of its ability. And that's what we're trying to do now. Without a doubt, as a startup business, the first 10 years, 10 years is a long time, but in farming terms, it's not long at all. The guiding principle has been to make a living. But at the same time, the whole way through the last 10 years, the sort of underlying current is to do that sustainably, environmentally, because that is the starting block that we've come from. And that's what we believe in fundamentally. So yeah, as we develop the business, every sort of business decision is sort of hand in hand. Does it make money? And is it the best thing we can do for the environment? The early days, it was very much straw based in the sheds. So much so to the point where actually we're probably bringing too much straw onto the farm. So we've now developed the sheds to reduce our straw output. So that lowers our P&K requirements on the farm, which we're looking too high with the straw that we were bringing in. So again, sort of trying not to sort of create waste streams that weren't closed. And the more we've developed that, the more we've created the system that we're using now. So we're putting in sort of mixed herbal lays to sort of generate sort of soil fertility. We're then sort of terminating them with the throughput of some pigs. So that sort of replaces the plough. Unfortunately, because our stock are sort of young in age, we can't look at a brassica break that we sort of consume during the winter months because the stock have to be in over the winter. So we looked at basically putting in veg for human consumption. We have a farm shop on site, so we have the ability to add value to that product. So we have a year's break where we grow vegetables, sort of a horticultural based system. And then the following year, we put that field then into sort of a combi crop and look at baling that. So that gives us a high protein feedstock then for the calves over the winter. So obviously, in farming, everything's about observations, and particularly for the kid goats and the roast veal, there's no one we can go copy. So everything we've developed on the farm has been a case of observing sort of our management technique and adjusting. For the kid goats, we really wanted to get them out of the sheds and grazing, and that took us down the rabbit warren of herbal lays. Kid goats, traditionally, you put them into a field, they won't touch the grass sward, they'll go straight to the hedges. And that's what led us to looking at establishing herbal lays. And the more we read into them, the more we saw the benefits. So we basically set up mob grazing off the back of that. And we now run the goats and the calves through mob grazing systems. In terms of advice for establishing, it's very difficult. Everything's very new. There's not many people doing it. So it's just trial and error. And the way we've developed the system has been around what's gone wrong and then can we make it better, and we certainly haven't got the perfect solution, but we think we're getting there. So obviously sort of first generation farmers, the cash flow is most important, and after putting up some big sheds, there isn't much left in the pocket for machinery. So when it came to sort of terminating grass lays, the idea of sort of bringing contractors in and sprays, spraying particularly just didn't sit right. Ploughing was our sort of solution. And, we looked at it and we said, well, actually, with the butchery and the farm shop, pigs is a viable option. And so we bring in the pigs. They soon turn over a sod of grass and kill off the grass. And that leaves it free for us to go in just with a rotavator the following year to establish the horticultural crops. Now, having said that, between both sort of the vegetables and cereals, we would sow a Phacelia vetch crimson clover cover crop. So what you're doing there is you're preventing any sort of weeds from reseeding, but you're also doing a lot of nitrogen fixing there as well with the vetches and the clovers. So it's really difficult to sort of capitalize the way we farm. Very much the nature of the farm has always been to have the environment up focus, and that certainly gives us a unique selling point and added value at the farm gate, and that is what draws our customer. But the other end, if I'm looking at the sort of the profit and loss accounts, if I have to spend money bringing in a fertilizer or a spray or something like that, I have to see the benefit at the other end, and I can't see it working. Why would you? It works fine this way, so we've just never bothered.
Great stuff, Charlie. A very different farming enterprise to Howell's. I can see the envy in Howell's eyes there, looking at all those flat fields, not very steep at all compared to Howell's farm. But again, looking at how you're sort of adapting or adopting those regenerative farming principles on your farm is really interesting. We'll go to questions. There's some that are coming beforehand. In terms of the environmental benefits of this approach on your farm, have you seen a sort of noticeable change in the biodiversity since you sort of started farming, or since you started sort of transitioning to a low input system? And is your farm's ability to sort of cope with climate change and adapt to more extreme weather events, as that sort of resilience increased at all? We'll start with you, Howell, if that's all right.
Yeah, good question to start with. Yeah, last summer was a good example, that long periods of dry weather, the drought, which we all had to deal with. With lots of clover and deeper rooting native grasslands and herbalized as well. I had grass all year round. You know, there was an abundance of it, not like this spring so far, but yeah, by having deeper rooting native grasslands, they just go looking for water and they're more resistant. We've got quite a few fields close to rock, very little topsoil, and they usually burn off in the past. I think acidic fertilizer tends to speed up that burning off process. But this last year, you know, we had those particular fields were pretty good, and you know, it wasn't fantastic at times, but you know, I was quite happy considering looking at my neighbour farms.
And you mentioned, didn't you, in your video, that having sort of reduced your reliance on inputs, that your yield actually sort of decreased to begin with, but after time it sort of increased again. I guess that's because the natural processes in the soil sort of they sort of restored almost that sort of symbiotic relationship between the roots and the plants and the microbes that were sort of restoring. And I guess it's often referred to as sort of land going into cold turkey mode, isn't it? So you obviously noticed an increase in yield over time, and which is great, yeah, compared to sort of other farmers who might be sort of struggling with more sort of high input systems, especially during periods of drought and heavy rainfall.
Yeah, initially when I cut back on inputs, you know, it was quite painful, to be honest. Just the transition, you know, you've seen your bale count, you know, whether hay or haylage, go from about 7 to 3 bales per acre, and you think, oh gosh, what am I doing, sort of thing. But over a period of time, and you know, within 3 years, we were nearly back to where we were, even with last year's drought. And like I said, you know, we got about 10 mil of topsoil on some fields and just rock. We still had a fair bale counter. Talking to some neighbours, you know, the amount of fertilizer they used, low bale count as well. You know, it was quite shocking how much in fertilizer alone the bale actually cost them. And by cutting out your inputs, you're taking away the risk. You know, that risk, especially when the inputs are expensive, whether it's feed of £400 a ton or fertilizer £800 a ton, you cut out that risk. And I think what's important, my top line has my turnover has reduced as well, but my profit has increased. So I think that's the key message I'd tell people. So yeah, but as you said, even though last year for some fields we're back to, you know, when we were using fertilizer bale count, and that's how I gauge it. Over the 12 months period, we grow as much grass over 12 months as we always have, and this spring we've got abundance of grass. It was the first time ever I can remember we turning hay fields out with about 4 to 5 inches of grass there.
Great stuff. Charlie, what about you? Have you noticed sort of that your system is more resilient to extreme weather events with the way that you're farming?
Sorry, I was busy typing to one of the answers there. In terms of resilience, yeah, and also in terms of biodiversity, like our farm very much came from a sort of origin of being like almost an amenity farm. My parents bought it to live out the good life, and nature was a high sort of priority there. So it's been a case of building a system which then balanced with that. But in terms of the resilience side, yes, we've always been considering that on the farm as we've developed. So the idea of herbal layers, multi-species, that is giving you a lot of resilience in the grass sward. We've also installed a sort of agroforestry tree lane sort of silver arable system. So again, that's providing you with a lot of resistance there. It's not only sort of increasing trafficability if you get high rainfall, but also it's sort of deep rooting and bringing up nutrients from sort of deeper underground as well, and also providing sort of shade cover. If you get a hot spell, so you're even in a drought year, you're going to get sort of some form of production. And the same just sort of in general, the diversity of the crops and the products that we offer through the farm shop. It's all about building that resilience to the business. And what's that old saying? Don't have all your eggs in one basket. We're trying to produce as many different products as possible, and that is giving us sort of financial resilience, as well as the resilience sort of climatically. I suppose it's all about that diversity. So
brilliant. And does that resonate with you at Peelan Farm, Denise?
Yeah, it does. We've changed over the last sort of 30 years our different enterprises. So now we've sort of moved from mixed with arable to include pigs and then sheep, and now we're predominantly cattle. And definitely our biodiversity and soil health has improved considerably since cattle and rotational mob grazing. And obviously we don't apply any agrochemicals or glyphosate. So we're doing everything to improve soil health, and it is definitely noticeable.
Great stuff. Another question. Sometimes this type of farming, regenerative low input farming, it's met with sort of the attitude of, yes, that's all well and good, but is it a profitable farming system? Does it pay the bills? Is it financially viable? Well, you've touched on this, but interested to know, is this an accurate statement? Or another way to put it, if you were to intensify your farming system, like buying in more inputs, do you think you would be more profitable, or as resilient as a business? We'll go back to you, Denise, with that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so regenerative agriculture or agroecology or whatever you want to call them, don't get too hung up on what it's termed, but very definitely we've reduced our inputs very significantly. And a farm of our size, with the current prices of agrochemicals, we're currently saving over £100,000 a year. So £100,000 a year, first of all, by not applying agrochemicals. Also, we don't feed any grain to our cattle. They're completely pasture raised. So there's very, very few inputs. We've also reduced our tractor usage. So reducing costs has made a huge has made a huge impact on our margin. But also what we found is the way that we're grazing, so rotational mob grazing with our cattle, actually, we've got this really fascinating bounce back in we're getting much better grass regrowth and grass capacity growth. So we're getting much better regrowth from our cattle as a result. So that also is beneficial. So we're fattening, up to 500 kilos live weight gain within 18 months. So which is productive in itself.
Absolutely, pretty good. That's a hell of a lot of saving. That is, yeah. And I think it resonates with some findings of a recent NFFN Cymru report as well. So we looked at some farm accounts in Wales, and through adopting sort of these measures, it found that average revenue on farms would decrease by around 12%, but this would be offset by a profitability increase of 42%. So obviously, yeah, it's something similar to what you've experienced as well. Charlie, how would you respond to that challenge that this type of farming is it's not proper farming, you can't make a living?
Again, I'm too busy typing. I need to concentrate. I can't do two things at once. Is it proper farming? Can you make a living? We're making a living. It's taken a long 10 years to sort of get it going and really functioning. But again, you've got to sort of like externalize, the context within which we're operating as well. Yeah, I mean, we've got a farm to fork business, which is very good. It enables us to sort of cut out the middlemen, and it decreases the fact that we're, producing a commodity, and we're getting the right value for it. But also, we're doing it without extra input costs. We're streamlining it so that it costs minimal. You can push the farm too far, but you've got to put more inputs into it. Whereas if you're working with the natural capital, it's far better. I mean, we're rearing bull calves and kid goats. They are naturally very intensive because they are effectively orphan stock, and that high input cost is always at the forefront of our minds. So that's why we're looking at the wider farm business, and as we evolve to look at reducing those costs, to basically have more control. And like we were talking there about sort of climatic resilience, I'd rather be sort of more resilient on my own back than relying on those external inputs where you have, I mean, look at the cost of grain over, this last year, it's been through the roof. Fair enough, it wasn't a natural cause, but, it just goes to show what potential there is in the future when, the climate extreme is going to become worse. So
that's it. So reducing your costs, taking the risk away, being more in control, it sounds like a no-brainer, but you could argue that you're in the minority when you kind of compare to the rest of the industry. Howell, what's the answer? Is it sort of just we need a change in shift in mentality, or has it been the legacy of past policies, or advising that farmers to sort of maximize production? How do you see it?
First thing I'd say, Reese, was the reason I've turned into this low input system, because I had tried the high input system for, I don't know, about 12 years and very little profit, and receding, spending a lot of money on fert and feed, it didn't work. It wasn't working for my farm, so I had to change. So I think to get other farmers to do it, I think policy has to be one key driver, and money. So not the payment for what we produce, but the payment for the benefits of how we are farming, whether it's looking after clean air, clean water sort of thing, pollution sort of thing, and those are the drivers that can make us change. And I think education, schools and colleges should be implementing these changes now. More production benefits the supermarket, I think, and that's about it. And big ag corporations, I don't know. Farming is quite simple. We don't have to take away the complexity of it. Keep it as simple as possible. Work with the natural resources, the sun, the rain. Look after the soil, and animals will thrive. Maybe we have to reduce numbers initially, but just take away the complexity. And yeah, and I feel like whether it's organic, regenerative, or whatever we want to call, or nature-friendly farming, I think we should call it farming, and call chemical farming, if you're using a lot of chemicals as a fertilizer, industrial farming, make farming with nature the norm sort of thing.
Yeah, turning the term on its head almost, isn't it? There's a question that's come in around herbalaise. Say Charlie and Howell, so in your videos that you've put herbalaise in. Are there better mixes to improve soil health and benefit nature than others?
I was just typing a reply. Yes, absolutely. Cotswold seeds are a great source of information. I don't know where you're located, but if you're in Northern Ireland, I think they have started redelivering. But what we are starting to find is that actually you can cut out a lot of the grass species from them and concentrate more on the herbs, because you're going to get your natural grasses are going to re-establish in them. So you'd be better off cutting out a lot of the grass from it when you reseed it and concentrate on the herbs more so than what's already in the mix at the moment. But that would be my opinion. The biggest problem we had was when it came to reseeding. We reseeded 1 year as a whole crop or under a whole crop, and we did find that actually a lot of the herb species were lost through it. And now what we've started doing is putting in the whole crop straight, cutting it, and then direct drilling it into the stubble at the far end. The reason we do the whole crop is that killed off any docks or any broadleaf species you might have, and allowed it to establish better, but also it kept your herbs. But that was just experience we found.
Yeah, can I come in there, Reece? Yeah, I've used a lot of herbal lays on my farm. I do like them initially, but I don't find they last, and they're quite a bit more expensive overseas. And I think we got to be careful, just trying to use some seeds that thrive in our environment. Depends where we are. We are high rainfall, quite acidic soil sort of thing. Just some of these herbal lays that some of these companies are selling, they want more alkaline soils. Just go for a walk, look on the side road verges, what's growing on a hedge, trying to mimic nature, what's already growing there. Cocksfoot, timothy, deeper rooting, meadow fescue sort of thing. I can grow lots of yarrow, clovers here sort of thing. Plantain sort of thing grows all right here. Chicory. And on a sheep farm, those sheep, they are nibblers, will sort of nibble everything out of your system somehow. Where I just graze cattle on land, I got a bit of variety of herbalays left there, but we just have to be mindful of buying stuff in. And I've done 4 biodiversity blitz last year, and there was 150 over 150 plants, trees as well, it'd be included in that, recorded on my farm. So there's a lot of different species already here. I think just give them a chance, stop using the inputs for fertilizer, and you're surprised what thrives on your farm.
So yeah, local species for the local context, I think is the message there, isn't it? Denise, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think what for going back to the principle of making your soil as hospitable as possible for root growth, certainly longer term perennials are important. Chicory is biennial, so it just it grows 1 year, flowers the next, and it dies back. So it's definitely for us, our main focus are cocksfoots, meadow fescues, foxtail, and timothy, and then also we're introducing things like yarrow and plantain. So the deeper rooting, longer lasting, more resilient to a mob rotational grazing system. But the deep rooting ones are really important. And also just an interesting thing, we've had an issue, we use white clover to capture nitrogen for nitrogen fixing, is we've noticed some white clover isn't as attractive to bees. So I've done a wee bit of research, and it's evident that the plant breeders, in their endeavor to improve the nitrogen fixing capacity of white clover, have sort of, in the collateral inadvertently effect is that the white clovers aren't always the best for nectar and pollen. So kind of depending on what you want in your grazing, if you want to stimulate pollination, for example, if you've got apples, so you want, you want fruit, then you need to go for the wilder, smaller white clovers that have got more pollen and nectar in them. But certainly, yeah, we've noticed that.
Brilliant. There's another question on the herbal lays, and I think that this is what the question is asking. How do biodiverse sort of species-rich native grasslands compare for soil health and productivity. I guess that's in comparison to herbal A's. Are they sort of the more natural grasslands, permanent grasslands, better overall than herbal A's?
Recommendaries?
If you want to take a stab at that one, Noel.
Yeah, I think what is key, we've worked with what's grown in areas on our farms for the last decades and centuries. Let's not try to be too clever and complex. Don't know if like local seeds, don't know, they thrive sort of thing. And I think whether it's hay flower meadows, don't know, we must try and grow what's naturally grown here. There's a reason they have grown in the past, and yeah, we just be mindful of the herbal A's in it. Don't know if they're too expensive to go reseeding and buying seeds and long lasting. Yeah, and yeah, they work initially, but I find some don't last, some do, but just like work with what's already been growing here.
Yeah, can I tell? Because I mean, actually, Hal makes a good point. I mean, the native grasslands have actually evolved on specific soil and environmental conditions. So it's not so much are they better for, for root growth than non-native. It really is finding what works on your farm and what is around you. You have some native species groups that actually are on very thin soils, and it's a bit of a struggle for them in any event. But certainly what we need to do in terms of improving soil health and narrowing the nutrient gap, we've got to do everything we can as farmers to improve root biomass. And that is the key to soil health. So anything to improve root biomass. And that means excluding agrochemicals, excluding glyphosate, and really focusing on your grazing systems and combining arable with an integrated livestock rotation, if that's at all possible.
Interesting. Yeah, well, you'll notice that the picture behind me, that's one of our hay fields. So that hasn't been ploughed in something like 50 years. So that is sort of permanent, sort of native species rich grasslands, if you want to define it as that. And the yield every summer is pretty consistent, and regardless of the weather. So I would say that approach works as well. You don't have to go for a herbal A every time.
Yeah,
We'll just head on and talk a bit about mob grazing, if that's all right. So Charlie and Howell, you saw from the videos that you're implementing mob grazing systems. But before I ask a few questions about your experience of that, Denise, if you're happy just to talk about some of the sort of principles behind sort of mob grazing, like what's the science behind it? Because it's all about sort of rest periods, isn't it, allowing the roots growth?
Yeah, but yes, it is. I mean, rest is the important thing. So fairly intensive, but not damaging grazing for short periods of time, then longer periods of rest. And what that does, it actually stimulates root growth. So there are various systems of mob rotational grazing. Some systems really intensively mob graze then rest, some not so intensive, some are just rotational, so rotating set stocking. But actually what we do here at home is sort of winter grazing is fairly open field. Then we bring them closer to the steading for calving, and this is the first year we've managed to do all of our calving outdoors. And then in the summertime, once calving is completed, we separate the cows into their groups with the bulls. We put them into 10-acre paddocks. We split the field up, actually. We spent most of winter planting 8 kilometers of hedgerow. We split all the fields up into 10-acre paddocks. So we effectively 30 cattle, 35 and a bull on 10 acres for 3 days. And then we take them off for 30 days. So if you think of the 3-3-3, that works for us with a bit of give and take. So they're on for 3 days and they come off for 30 days and they go back again. And what we found is that stimulates that root growth, and then the regrowth of the grass after the rest is phenomenal. So, I mean, that's, and, you know, it's not that we're, you know, the farm is between 200 and 700 feet. And I'm talking of a field, our primary grazing field that actually is, you know, it hasn't been ploughed for, well, since the 1940s. And it's a really interesting grassland, but the biodiversity has improved considerably, incidentally. But that's a mob grazing system for us anyway. That works for our farm.
Brilliant. Yeah, because it's totally different to I guess what the norm is, set stocking. So you know, a specific number of sheep or cattle grazing on a paddock throughout the year, and where you don't get that rest period.
Yeah, and actually, funnily enough, sorry to butt in there again, is that we found our cattle are much happier with it. They're really good signs of what you know, satiation, of fullness, and lots of good ruminating. And then they're, you know, when they're ready to move, they're ready to move. So it works very well both ways.
Brilliant. And in terms of implementing that system on your farms, Charlie and Howell, have you encountered any obstacles or challenges, like because there's a significant investment as well, I guess, in the infrastructure to do that? So Charlie, I see you smiling there. We'll start with you.
Deer. There's been many a morning when I've come down and the deer, they learn quite quickly about the electric fencing. But if the calves are fresh and they see the deer, they get startled by the deer, and you go down and the electric fencing is just across the field, which is, makes for an interesting morning. But one thing that we've learned to do is every field has a galvanized wire running down the longest length of it. And then that means you can leave the battery box and solar charger in one place. And then we would just use a crocodile clip to clip the electric fence onto that live wire. It makes moves so much quicker and easier. We have just recently invested in the Kiwi Tech fencing system. It's quite fiddly, but once you get your head around it, it definitely makes erecting and dismantling the electric fencing far quicker. Quick release water fittings to make moving troughs quick and easy. That works well. The stock pick it up quite quickly. I think
so there's a mindset change there, because you're still investing, aren't you? Sort of you're still sort of investing in infrastructure, but it's another type of cost compared to sort of buying in inputs, I guess, that, you know, in the long term will make your farm more resilient to sort of biodiversity.
Yeah, and you know, cost wise, it's not that big. You know, most people have sets of electric fencing lying around. You know, the only thing is making sure you've got good ones. I've spent too much time with gate reels and wrapper fencing and everything getting tangled, and unfortunately Rutland went out of business. Well, they sold to a German company, and it's all sort of quite cheap and cracks too quickly. But this new stuff seems to work well. And like quantity wise, like you have electric fencing anyway. Like you say, it's capital investment, but it's going to last a lifetime. So, you know, it's not an input cost that you have to put in every year. So. That's it.
Yeah. How well have you experienced? Similar challenges to Charlie, and it'd be interesting to hear experience of the no fence collars as well, because that's in itself, you can mob graze or rotational graze without a fence at all with that technique. So it'd be interesting to compare those two systems that you're adopting at Escarlate.
First of all, with sheep, I've discovered life's too short to electric fence sheep too often. So that's all I do is mob the sheep up, try and have just one large flock of sheep sort of thing, and move them on field scale, so you can control it a bit easier. You know, small fields, you know, less days, a bigger field, maybe 7 days, but you know, they never last more than 7 days in one field. Just keep moving them, and it's amazing how soon those fields recover. And with cattle, you know, I quite enjoy the electric fence and cattle one strand. You know, I can't remember what the company's called, but the fast reeling of a poly wire, which is a must sort of thing. Some issues is water. If you haven't got a good water source, or if you only got a stream, sometimes that's an issue. Obviously, water's key to it all. Running a water pipe, if you've got a source of water, is quite easy once it's set up. A few hours to set it up, sort of in the beginning of the season is pretty much sorted, sort of thing. And moving water troughs is just quite easy. Then shelter on stormy weather or hot sunny days is something you've got to be mindful of, especially last summer. We had to sort of move the cows maybe twice a day, depends on where the sun was, sort of thing, coming from. Because the last thing you want is, because if you look on a hot sunny day, cows are under the trees, sort of thing, if you've got trees, or under the hedges. So we've got to be mindful of that. And awkward slopes is a bit of a challenge sometimes, and different fields. Like I wish I had flat fields like Charlie, but I haven't got many of them. And with a no fence technology, yeah, it's fantastic, game changer for me. I tend to use most of it on common land, which is on a larger scale. So water is a must, sort of thing. You can just shift them around. I don't do the mob grazing as much as probably I could and should on the mountain, but we do it. It's quite good and it's quite easy. They respect it, sort of thing. Very rare I get any audible warnings, let alone electric shocks. We use them on conservation grazing on some land we'll manage for other people. They're just priceless. It allows you not just manage the grass, but manage where you want to graze, and avoid objects, whether it's a certain tree is a pond or shepherd's hut, or sometimes there isn't a physical tidy fence there, so that no fence is priceless. And I'm glad to hear there's grants coming available to purchase them.
Hul, I've got a question for you about the no fence. Do you have to have a collar on every animal, or if you were to take the sort of matriarchs and the herds, do they sort of stick together?
Good question. Yeah, I tend to know. In the winter, I'll try and have a collar on most of them, because the two that you haven't got a collar on is the ones that just want to come home and just go back in the shed or something. But in the summer, no, I think is about 55% of them got actually a working collar on them. Some of them have got a collar on them. Either the battery's gone flat or just switched it off. And yeah, just the matriarchs is key. I got one bunch of cattle, there's 10 there, there's 4 of them got collars on. So far so good, sort of thing. Just be mindful of where you are grazing. If you're grazing close to a busy road or something, I'd make sure you've got collars on. But if there's a plan B to be had, sort of thing, I think initially be fine, just a few of them, and eventually I want to increase the cattle, but I don't want to increase the collars, so I'll just you'll get to know which one tests them out, or
there's always one,
the awkward cow. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned grants that potentially available for these collars. If you don't mind me asking about the sort of expenditure and the costs, maybe of how much does a collar cost? Is there a sort of subscription fee associated with that?
Yeah. So at the moment they cost £250 each to buy. There's a 4-year warranty. So you get a battery and a collar for that price, and the subscription is £45 a year, or you can just pay a monthly charge. So if you only use them 6 months of year, it's cheaper to go on the monthly charge. Yeah, so there is a cost, but the way I do it, I can keep cows pretty much cheap over the summer, cheap over summer and quite cheap over winter, sort of thing. So I've had cows on heifers calving on a hill. They've been up all winter. They haven't cost me nothing apart from my time, the collar, and a little bit of hay every other day, sort of thing.
Well, Questions coming in, but I've seen, yeah, you're busy multitasking, answering my questions and also typing the questions in. So that's a really well done. Good job for keeping up. Just going to ask, sort of playing devil's advocate, really, in terms of sort of your farming systems. What does that mean for like food security? Because some might argue that you're potentially not maximizing production, and you could produce more, and that you're not sort of maximizing contribution towards food security. But obviously, food security is a very complex subject that isn't just about how much food we produce. But yeah, just wondering, kind of how would you challenge that sort of narrative? Denise, if you want to come in, yeah.
So I think it depends on how you define food security, because global food security is dominated by geopolitical issues, and we grow more than enough food globally. And the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization demonstrate that very well. Our cereals are enough on their own to provide the calories for the global population. So from my point of view, the real food security is what we have in the UK. It's the lack of access to proper nutrition. That's the food insecurity that we've got to deal with. We've got loads of food. We've got more food than we need. We've got so much food, we bin it. And globally, we bin it. We're binning between 30 and 40%. So, I mean, the crazy thing is, as farmers, though, from our point of view, and this was a factor in what we've done in shaping our enterprises, we've shortened our food chain. So we've got complete control of what we farm. But as farmers, if we're binning 30 to 40% of what we're trying to grow, that has an immediate environmental impact. So food security, we've got to forget about growing for the planet. Britain, in any event, only contributes something like 2% to global grain trade. So it's nothing. But, we need to grow for our local communities. That's real food security. Sorry, you've got me on a hobby horse, Reese.
I regret asking a question. Charlie, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I'd add to what Denise is saying. Food security, sure, we're exporting a huge proportion of what we produce as byproducts from the animals, but we've just lost the tradition and the heritage of how to use those parts. You take any of the offal that comes off any of our animals, and we're lucky we operate a nose-tail butchery, so we're able to sell the offal and the hearts and the livers and the kidneys, and people actively seek us out because we're able to get that for the customers. But I think as a nation, there is a large proportion of the animals that we no longer consume. There is also a massively elongated and complicated supply chain in regards to sort of the wider food distribution network, and the amount of waste that comes from that is appalling. Unfortunately, I think the biggest mistake we've made since the sort of post-war era is that we've lost a lot of the cooperatives that we used to have. They are no longer farmer controlled. They are now predominantly global sort of large business sort of managed, and as a result, we've maybe lost that efficiency through those co-ops of actually making the most value out of what the farmer produces. I mean, a classic example is up here is all the sort of small farms would have had layer hens out the back, and we had a very good train network in Northern Ireland. There was an egg co-op which collected the eggs, put them on the train, and they got shipped into Belfast to provide Belfast with eggs. Simple solutions like that. They were farmer run because the co-ops were farmer managed, whereas now we're looking at sort of a much more industrialized system, and I think the inefficiencies within that is massive. But that's just my personal opinion. So.
Oh, greatly valued. Howell, do you have any thoughts on that sort of food security?
Yeah, like Denise said, globally we produce enough food to feed a lot more people. Distribution is a big issue. We have to be really mindful in, especially Wales, what we, as far as food security, because we produce a lot of lamb, sheep meat. We consume very little of it ourselves. So we have to be mindful of that. I think everybody, every farmer, every landowner should grow more veg, not on huge scale, but just enough to feed your communities or just your families. We import a lot of veg sort of thing. We complain there's nobody to pick it on big industrial sized farms. A more diverse, diet, perhaps, seasonal veg sort of thing. Maybe we should eat more red meat, so lamb and beef instead of chicken sort of thing, because the way chickens are being fed in big chicken sheds, I'm not sure if it's sustainable at all. The energy cost and the price of grain plays a big part in that. And I think people have to be mindful of what we eat. We do like a bit too much choice sometimes. I think I'll leave it there.
Here we go. No, it's no, you make really good points, all of you. It's the waste issue, there's the distribution, and there's sort of, as you say, Denise, feeding, not feeding the world perhaps, but feeding communities, and maybe that requires a shift maybe in sort of the type of foods that we produce, not just looking at how food is produced, but like what we produce as well, because I think that's been a big driver of biodiversity loss in itself. I think sort of the specialization of farming across the UK and the loss of mixed farming systems. I think nature inherently thrives on that diversity in the landscape. I think there are no more open questions, so I will ask a final question to you all. In 30 seconds each, if you can just sort of condense what you've said and sort of explain why you think farmers should go down sort of regenerative, low input route. We'll start with you, Denise. You're on mute. We were doing so well.
Sorry. So going down the low input route, okay. So we all have to earn a living on our farms. Low input means lower cost. So if you go down low input, low impact, and have that as your principal driver, and we know science is telling us that where we farm without agrochemicals, we actually farm better. And we know science is telling us also that when you use agrochemicals, we're wasting a lot. 40% of nitrogen is wasted, 50% of phosphates are wasted, and the plants take up only, I think, more than, anyway, the statistics don't matter too much. And we know that glyphosate destroys soil microbiome. And if we're focusing on root soil health, then we've got to be very careful the extent to which agrochemicals destroy the hospitable soil environment that we absolutely have got to have for healthy root health, so healthy root growth, which is really essential for soil health.
Charlie, 30 seconds. Why would you recommend going down that route?
Regenerative farming, biodiversity is abundance. So the more diversity we have, the more sort of product that we can produce. It might not be the traditional farming products that we have now, but definitely the more abundant we can be, the more people we can feed. And as Denise says, like low input farming is basically manipulating the natural world. All the inputs are already there. We just have to harvest them. So that's a way of sort of answering that question without all three of us saying the same thing.
Brilliant. And I know Howell likes to have the final word, so over to you, Howell.
Just reduce complexity, reduce risk, reduce pollution, improve air quality, water quality, restore biodiversity, produce healthier, more nutritional food, and just keep it simple and then enjoy farming, enjoy what we're doing.
Brilliant. Can I thank you all the panelists for providing your experience and knowledge. I'll echo one of the comments in the Q&A that this has been the most sort of brilliant webinar, and that is down to your input and your expertise. It's been really good. Just to plug, the next NFFN webinar is tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. So that's titled Ecosystem and Balance, Pest and Disease Management. So that is with NFFN's Martin Lyons and Patrick Barker. And then on Friday in the afternoon, 1:30, we have our last webinar of the week, Slow the Flow, Farming for Flood Management, with Sam Kenyon, myself as a panelist, and Dan Turner from the Rivers Trust. So thank you again. Thank you for listening. Thank you for submitting such great questions. And thank you very much for our panelists. Diolch yn fawr iawn. And nos da.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Nice to see you. Thanks very much.
You.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.